They're coming to get you, Barbara.
And have been since around 1968 with Night of the Living Dead. They've continued throughout Romero's Dead series and a whole slew of other good and bad films, and some really bad films. But the zombie has been shuffling and shambling and occasionally running its way into our hearts for a good long while. Its origins come back to the Congo region of Africa. There are two particular words, Zumbi for fetish and Nzambi meaning a god, as well as being the name of a specific snake god in the voodoo religion. When slavers brought these people from Africa to the Caribbean, particularly Haiti, these religions and words carried on, and this is where the sort of white folk got hold of the word, and since then we've had this strange relationship with the reanimated dead. The soulless beings that are almost like the dark reflection of death. It's what we fear. We fear this lack of humanity. We pride ourselves so much on being rational, thinking, non-animal beings that this has been a great source of terror and introspection, really. I think some zombie movies do this really well. Colin comes to mind, actually, looking into the mind of a zombie. You know, they have some semblance of memory, they have some semblance of rationality to a degree. They can sort of follow familiar paths, they can recognise people. I mean, obviously it's all dependent on the interpretation, and this is what's great about the zombie thing. The framework is this: reanimated dead, probably rotting. That's it, that's the framework. There is nothing more. How it happens is up to the creator. What the effects are is up to the creator. The speed of transformation is up to the creator. The speed of movement is up to the creator now. And, you know, we get this blank slate, and this is why there's so many varying takes on the zombie genre. But one of the big interesting things that has really come through, like I say with Romero's series, is the fact that these maybe aren't the monsters. And that's another very introspective way of looking at it. Throughout the Dead series, I think this progressed. The first one, there's a little bit of like, if these people weren't arguing so much, they'd have probably been alright. And it just got progressively worse. Day of the Dead was, I think, a great culmination of this in many ways, when the military are experimenting, trying to humanise them, which of course was picked up in some of the Resident Evil film series as well, trying to sort of domesticate them and get them back to a sort of quasi-humanity, enough to perhaps be good enough to be slaves, which is weird considering the origin of the word. But of course it backfires, because it's man's hubris. It's the fact that we are the monsters. We see a resource to be tapped. We see a thing that we can try and control. Lower than even a pet, I think, in many ways. And, you know, I know Simon Pegg's gone down on record saying it, and I think I am fully in agreement that Bub is one of my favourite zombies ever, because he's adorable. He's a reanimated dead thing. He's desiccated. He's a corpse, effectively, with a very tiny semblance of humanity left. But he's adorable. You know, when he salutes, and obviously when he's just like, no, I'm shooting you now. You know, you will die. It's just such a great character, and I think this was really the beginning, in earnest, I think, of the idea that the humans could be the bad ones. And like I say, it's been picked up in a number of films. You know, 28 Days Later, really, the military in that. It's often the military being portrayed. I mean, I'm no massive fan of the military. I think it's often a necessary evil. But, you know, it's hard to escape that in a lot of these films, the military are the ones who are causing the problem. The military are the ones who aren't grasping the severity of the situation and just think they're just mindless beasts to be put down. But of course, when you're trained simply to shoot away your problems, that is what you're going to do. And I'm not saying that all military, you know, is trained that way. I know in a lot of cases, the best case scenario is not to actually engage, you know, to avoid confrontation. But in these films, I think it is taken to the extreme of what we see as a negative of the military, you know, like shoot first, ask questions later. And particularly when these people are considered, or these zombies are considered, to be not people, you know, to be less than rational. How can you rationalise with it? You can't. It can't speak, so what do you do? So it's sort of a bit more understandable, perhaps, but still, there's got to be ways around it. You can try. And recently I did see a couple of great films that I think really brought it back into my mind, you know, about this idea I've had really since I first watched, Day of the Dead particularly, many years ago. And the one that really, I think, cements like how the military can be a bit untrustworthy, I guess, was actually The Girl with All the Gifts, part of which was filmed quite nearby. And quick side note, actually, it's quite interesting. Around this sort of period, from about 2013 is the first point that I can see, there's been an influx of fungus-based zombie films, particularly cordyceps-based, because there is a real-life version. It does, in fact, infect ants and sort of pilot them to higher ground before it breaks through and releases its spores. But we've seen, The Last of Us and this, and I think there's probably only more coming because people are realising that, that's an interesting take on it. And it is an interesting idea, the fact that it's not radiation or an infection or whatever else, or genetic manipulation. It's none of these things. It's something different from the things that we've seen for the last sort of few decades. But I do find The Girl with All the Gifts very interesting because it does show us more of the humanity of these creatures. Not necessarily the, as they call them, the Hungries themselves, but the second generation who were created from infected mothers during pregnancy. And I'm not going to go into the graphic detail that it does. I mean, it doesn't show it, but the way it tells it, I don't even have a uterus, but it was uncomfortable for me. Basically, eating their way out. But they retain a sort of humanity. It's a very interesting idea. Rather than being entirely taken over and controlled by the fungus, they're in as it's posited in the film, a symbiosis, where, the fungus gives a few beneficial effects for the fact that it can be helped to procreate and propagate. But of course, until they're in sort of a frenzy, if you will, a bloodlust or a hunger, they are just like normal kids. You wouldn't know the difference. They're quite intelligent as well, in fact. It's shown a few times, they have good rationalising skills and tactical skills and things like this, but they are very human. They could be just kids. And that's a great disarming tactic, of course. Who doesn't want to help children? But of course the military, rounded these kids that they found on one little run through, a little recce, a little scouting mission. And they rounded up these kids that they'd found and are training them, teaching them, encouraging them to be as human as possible, but then still dissecting them to try and make a vaccine. And it's a similar thing to The Last of Us, obviously, with Ellie sort of being the one who could make a vaccine. Her immunity could be passed on, but she'd have to die. For them to manufacture a vaccine, they have to kill the hungry child, as it were, in this case particularly Melanie, and it's awful. We're seeing the military and doctors who are protected by them, particularly Glenn Close's character, who's amazingly well played. I love Glenn Close in this. I loved everyone in this. It was a great film. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It is available through Amazon. That's where I caught it, and of course other sources as well, not sponsored. But it encapsulates exactly what I'm on about. This idea that we are superior, so we will humanise these kids to end up killing them to make a vaccine because we must survive. You're the interloper. It's wrong, it's ethically wrong. And quick spoiler for the ending. That's your warning. They do get their comeuppance. The only remaining human is Miss Justineau, just to teach the child Hungries. So in the end, it didn't matter. Everything still fell. And that's one of the great things that I do consistently see. Whilst we see this idea that maybe humanity's the bad guys, we do see the fact that these supposedly animalistic, inferior beings are actually beating us. They're winning. Which brings me to the other film that's sort of encapsulated a few ideas lately. And that's The Resort from 2016. I didn't actually know about this. I was just randomly hunting for films on Netflix, which is where I caught this. And I was like, that sounds interesting. It's basically Jurassic Park with zombies. Night of the Jurassic Dead. No, not that. But it's very interesting, this idea again that, more from a business angle, which is an interesting take. It's not one that's seen too often. The fact that someone's gone, wait, I've got this island. I could make a resort where people can just shoot zombies all they want. And of course, as we find later on through the film, there's a darker element. I'm not going to spoil it because, again, I think this one's quite interesting and worth a look yourself. But of course, it all falls down. Man's hubris, I think, is more than the military angle, obviously, in this. They escape, they break through, things go wrong. But because someone. This is a bit of an interesting one, because it's not that they would naturally have done it necessarily. This is meddling by, I don't know, do-gooders, if you will. You know, the sort of like human rights people for zombies. You know, it's effectively what they are. They convince a woman to break into the system to just upload some details, but of course at the same time they're downloading their own virus into the computer, which messes it all up. And that's what makes it go wrong. But I think the hubris in this is the belief that that would never happen, and the fact that they'd be able to sort it out. You know, the fact that they could get out of there and everything would be fine. But as we see throughout the film, it doesn't work out that way. The park still fails, and the island is destroyed by airstrikes to prevent further infection. We'll get on to how effective that was in a second. But the dust settles, and you know, there's one known survivor, of course, the final girl. Just to stick another trope in there. The dark element that I don't want to spoil for you, you know, seems to be sorted out as well, although for all we know that could still be going on. And then our last little snippet of the film where we see shufflers running up the beach. Because yeah, some seem to have survived. You know, they could have gone to the seabed. If it's like a lot of zombie films where they don't actually need to breathe or anything, why not? You know, they could have just shambled across the seabed for as long as it took. And I think it's the final nail, if you will, in the hubris coffin for this film. You know, this is very much one of those. I mean, yes, it does have the humans are awful, with obviously the fact that they've built this resort just to capture and shoot zombies. It's awful. But I think hubris is one of the big elements of this film as well. You know, and that's, like I say, the final nail. They didn't get them all. It didn't work. Just because it worked last time, why would you think it would definitely work this time? You didn't put other fail-safes in. And I think that's great, you know, this idea of hubris, as well as the horrible nature, I think, coming together. Because in this video, you know, I've talked about both, you know, the fact that humans are evil and hubris, and I think that the zombie genre is a great vehicle for looking at a number of different things in ourselves. You know, I mentioned obviously earlier with Colin as well. You know, we gain sympathy over time. They have moved from simple creatures to be feared, and just like this dark reflection of what happens when we die, we lose ourselves, to reflections, you know, with mirrors for us to look into, and as I say with Colin, to even be sympathetic towards, and perhaps a little in Warm Bodies, you know, there's that sympathy element as well, although obviously that's a very different take. That's very comedy based, and a lot of people don't count it as a true zombie film because of it being almost like a romantic comedy. I think it got a lot more hate than it deserved, but I'm in the minority perhaps. You know, it's passable. But like I say, you know, we have gained, I think, a lot of insight into ourselves through the zombie genre, and as long as it's well written, as long as it's not just throwing tropes in the air, then I think this is a genre that can continue. And one of the other main elements that made me want to do this video is recently a good friend of mine, author, I've mentioned him a lot of times as well, T.W. Malpass. I covered his book Cherry Lakes here. It's done a sort of book, Everything Dies, which is very much The Walking Dead, but in written form. But he said himself, you know, in the foreword, he didn't want to do just another zombie tale where, you know, the human drama, it's all boring, a lot of walking, you know, all this kind of stuff. He wanted to really do it well, on his terms, and in a way that he's happy with. And you know, my ability to focus on reading these days is very limited thanks to my issues, but I've given it a start, and you know, I'm liking where it's going. And I think writing like that is really where, you know, the zombie genre and anything, you know, that's kind of got, I suppose, a post-apocalyptic avenue really shines through. So if you want to take a look at it, I'm not sponsored to say this, you know, this is entirely just genuine on my part. You know, if you want to take a look at it, go and check it out on Amazon. There's a link in the description below, and season 2 is well on its way. So yeah, zombies are interesting reflections of us. Hubris is bad, humans are evil. So until next time, as always, take care.